Welcome to the Insight-Driven CIO podcast, where technology leadership meets strategic clarity. I'm Mark Sundergaard. Over the years, I've learned something. Technology changes constantly. Leadership doesn't. Every week, I have conversations with CIOs, technology advisors, MSPs, and business leaders trying to solve some pretty complex challenges. The goal of this podcast isn't to talk about products. It's to look at familiar business problems from a different perspective and hopefully leave you with an idea you can use in your own organization. Let's get started. I've been thinking about something. Almost every executive conversation I have starts with a solution. We're looking at AI. We need better security. We're trying to reduce costs. We're planning a network refresh, whatever the initiative happens to be. Nobody has ever started a meeting by saying, "Mark, we need better visibility." And yet, after 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, that's usually where we end up. Because every one of those objectives, reducing costs, improving security, modernizing infrastructure, deploying AI, depends on understanding where you are today. Not where you hope you are, not where you think you are, where you actually are. And I've noticed something over the years. The organizations making the best decisions aren't always the ones with the newest technology. They're the ones with the clearest understanding of their environment. That's a very different thing. Let me explain what I mean. A while back, I was working with an organization that was preparing for a major modernization project. Good leadership, experienced IT team, successful business. Nobody felt like they were in trouble. The conversation started exactly where you'd expect. They wanted to talk about where they were going. Makes perfect sense. Before talking about the future, we spent some time understanding the present. We started asking fairly simple questions. What services are in place today? Who owns each contract? How many locations are involved? What renews this year? Where are the wireless assets? Where are the internet circuits? Nothing complicated, just building a complete picture. And something interesting happened. Every answer created another question. Finance had one report. IT had another. Operations had different information. Procurement had their own records. Nobody was wrong. Everybody was working with the information available to them, but nobody had the whole picture. As we kept digging, we found services that were still active but no longer needed. Contracts nobody realized were still renewing. Devices that had long outlived the projects they originally supported. Again, this wasn't poor management. Quite the opposite. It was years of growth, years of successful projects, years of making good business decisions, one decision at a time, until eventually the environment became more complicated than anyone realized. That's when something really clicked for me. Complexity usually isn't created by bad decisions. It's created by hundreds of good decisions made over many years. Here's something else I've noticed. Organizations rarely struggle because people aren't working hard. Most leadership teams are working incredibly hard. IT is busy. Finance is busy. Operations is busy. Security teams are busy. Everybody is solving problems. The challenge isn't effort. The challenge is alignment. Everybody sees a different part of the organization. Finance sees invoices. IT sees infrastructure. Operations sees locations. Security sees risk. Leadership sees budgets and business priorities. Those perspectives are all important. But when they're disconnected, executives end up making decisions using pieces of information instead of the entire picture. That's where visibility becomes valuable. Not because visibility is exciting. Honestly, it isn't. Nobody gets excited about inventory. Nobody gets excited about documentation. Nobody gets excited about reporting. What leaders get excited about is confidence. Confidence that when someone asks, what do we actually have? The answer isn't, I think, it's, here's exactly where we are. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned over the years. Visibility isn't the goal. Better decisions are. Visibility simply makes better decisions possible. That's the difference. Visibility doesn't reduce spending. Visibility doesn't modernize infrastructure. Visibility doesn't improve security. Visibility doesn't deploy AI. What it does is remove assumptions. And once assumptions disappear, leaders start making better decisions. To me, that's what executive visibility is really about. Not inventory, not spreadsheets, not dashboards. Confidence. Confidence in the decisions you're making. Confidence in the direction you're going. Confidence that your next investment is based on facts instead of assumptions. You know, I've started thinking about visibility a little differently over the past few years. I don't really think it's an IT conversation. I think it's a leadership conversation because every executive, whether they're a CIO, a CFO, or a COO, is ultimately trying to answer the same question. How do we make better decisions? And better decisions start with better information. I've seen organizations spend months debating what they should do next, not because they lack talented people, not because leadership couldn't agree. They simply didn't have confidence in the information they were using. Once everyone trusted the same information, the conversation changed. Instead of debating the data, they started discussing strategy. That's a very different meeting. If I had to leave you with a few observations from all of those conversations over the years, they'd be these. The first one, visibility is much bigger than inventory. Inventory tells you what you own. Visibility tells you what it means. There's a difference. Visibility answers questions like, why do we have this? Who depends on it? What happens if it fails? Does it still create value? Should we keep investing in it? That's executive visibility. Not just knowing what's there, but understanding why it matters. Here's another observation. The organizations that seem to move the fastest usually aren't moving faster because they work harder. They're moving faster because they spend less time trying to figure things out. They already understand their environment. They know what's changing. They know where the risks are. They know where the opportunities are. That creates confidence. And confidence creates momentum. I've seen projects that took weeks simply because everyone was trying to answer basic questions before they could make a decision. I've also seen organizations make those same decisions in a single meeting because everyone trusted the information in front of them. That's not luck, that's preparation. One more thought. Every major initiative, whether it's AI, cybersecurity, network modernization, cloud transformation, or cost optimization, starts in exactly the same place. Understanding where you are today, not where you hope to be, not where the vendor presentation says you should be, where you are today. Because if your starting point isn't clear, it's very difficult to build the right roadmap. I have always believed clarity comes before strategy, and strategy comes before optimization. When I look back over the organizations I've had the opportunity to work with, the ones that consistently make the best decisions aren't necessarily the largest organizations. They aren't always the ones with the biggest IT budgets, and they certainly aren't always the ones buying the newest technology. What separates them is understanding. They understand their environment. They understand what's changing. They understand where they're exposed. And they understand where the greatest opportunities exist. That's why visibility matters. Not because visibility is the destination. It's because visibility gives leaders the confidence to move forward. Without second guessing. Without assumptions. Without wondering whether they're solving the right problem. To me, that's what optimization really is. It's not just reducing costs. It's not just improving performance. It's making better decisions over and over again. And that starts with understanding your business. So let me leave you with one question. If your CEO walked into your office tomorrow morning and asked, show me everything our organization depends on, our services, our vendors, our contracts, our costs, our biggest risks, and where you think we should invest next, could you answer with confidence? Or would you need to start gathering information from half a dozen different places? That's a question worth thinking about. Thanks for listening to the Insight-Driven CIO podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you a new perspective on a challenge many organizations face. If it did, then we've accomplished exactly what we set out to do. Until next time.